Certainty Principle, Chapter 12, the Big Brain Organ. The brain through which all reality data is processed is an organ that deals with certainty and uncertainty in the same way that the stomach deals with hunger and satiety. But the brain is a loud and hungry organ. It's like a set of small intestines in our head, constantly in need of feeding, hounding me constantly to be fed. When I'm hungry, my stomach growls, and I seek any food that will satisfy it. When I'm full, it digests the nutrients that reinforce my body. When I'm uncertain, for example, fearful, my brain seeks to abstract the data it takes from the senses to comfort itself. When I am certain, for example, confident, it abstracts the data to reinforce my concept of self. As a device, the brain's limitations are defined by its binary operating system. Cognition is the brain's game, which is to say, the boss. It's an acronym for Brain's Operating Symbolic System. The boss is coded for the cognition game, deciphering certainty versus uncertainty by naming experiences with words. This binary brain game seeks certainty through comparison: Coke or Pepsi, boxers or briefs, war or peace. But is the boss game the only game? Is reality as I experience it filtered through the boss, reducing my interpretation of reality to a mere shadows on the wall, as Plato describes in the Republic? Furthermore, the stories that my brain creates about me to establish certainty through my identity, I call them RAPs, R-A-P-P-S, repetitive auto-reinforcing personification programs. These are the stories you tell yourself all the time in your head, reinforce who you are, your vanity, further filter day-to-day reality to the point of a gray distortion, even fantasy about what's really going on around me. Ironically, clinging to such stories feeds the very demon of self from which I am naturally trying to escape. Nearly every waking hour, my brain seeks emotion-stimulating data patterns. We sometimes call these patterns stories, and the brain is my story-making machine. From the moment we awaken, and sometimes even while we sleep, our brains are on a voracious hunt for stories with conclusions, creating the input-emotion connection that it finds so satisfying. As children, the fabric of our personal story is thin, and there are many windows that allow us to experience life in an unencumbered way. That is to say, life is experienced de novo, instant by instant, with little coloring or attachment to prior experience. As we age, these stories and connections become richer and richer. At some stage, this aggregate epic story of me takes over as the backdrop for our conscious experience. And we may begin accepting or rejecting real experiences based on whether or not they reinforce the master storyline created in our brain. This story contains thousands of biases that may or may not be accurate and may be operating on the conscious or subconscious level of brain activity. Often, when the story becomes mature, a phenomenon known as confirmation bias kicks in, can evolve to dominate our field of perception. It's all fueled by the brain's insatiable desire to reinforce the stories running in its neurons about itself. It's RAM, so to speak, random access memory, to extend the computer analogy. At extreme, the narrowness of viewpoint becomes my identity. It becomes the internal definition of my very existence, to the exclusion of true existence. Again, this is Plato's allegory of the cave. The illusion takes over, the experience is only the shadows on the wall, the remnants of the filters, a mutation of the true manifesting reality. Such fabrications clearly are counterproductive. So what is the solution to the certainty and confidence dilemma? Just as the stomach is the organ of food digestion, the brain is the organ of data digestion. It is effective in reasoning with known sensory data, but its effectiveness declines as the data becomes abstracted. Reasoning, or cognition, is the brain's domain of certainty synthesis, but it is a domain with limitations. Formal and informal logic is the cognitive software of reasoning, mathematics being its purest form. But logic is optimal for solving problems that are not abstracted, real, concrete. Logic is the algorithm of the brain, not the algorithm of the universe of all problems. And herein lies the rub. Problems that are beyond the logical domain create uncertainties that are often rationalized through theories, conjecture, and the fabrication of stories that define us. The more abstract and persistent the target of cognitive activity, the more uncertain the brain becomes, and the more embedded the stories become. Uncertainty encumbers action taking, and so affects performance in a variety of negative ways, causing inflexibility and causing inflexibility and the more abstract and persistent the target of cognitive activity, the more uncertain the brain becomes, and the more embedded the stories become. Uncertainty encumbers action taking, and so affects performance in a variety of negative ways, causing inflexibility and reactivity. Just as bad food causes indigestion, that preoccupies the experience with gastrointestinal distress, uncertainty undermines the performance by eroding confidence, a key predicator of progress. More so because experience, sensory data collection, is localized in the brain, the very organ of reality perception. It becomes difficult to distinguish between the fabrications brought about by my chronic uncertainty and those that come from reality itself. The brain's stories bring relief to uncertainty by creating identity. Identity formation is the brain's process of synthesizing certainty. It creates the illusion that the abstract thoughts are reality and centers such thoughts' stories around the thinker. Consider a compliment or criticism you might have received as a child. After all, I is the sole common denominator in the universe of uncertainty. Therefore, I is the natural germ of certainty around which stories can be attached to provide rational meaning, to provide certainty. The identity illusion insulates the brain from the onslaught of reality data that is constantly impinging upon it. Consider the phenomenon of identification with celebrities. Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, the Kardashians. Their stories all provide a respite from the harsh sensory data of my reality by co-opting someone else's story, which is inaccurate, by the way, and is so rich, famous, and successful. I can reinforce the illusion through all manner of activity, reading their Twitter feeds, buying their clothes or cologne. Celebrities often thrive on the attachment of their fans, capitalizing on it for their own benefit. Such fantasies are double illusions because I am fabricating an illusion about a relationship with an abstracted perception of an individual that's inaccurate, of course, that's being fabricated by their publicist. Such attachments promote inaction, as the aggregate fixation with such fantasies consume bandwidth that would otherwise be mandate directed. Identity creation is the brain seeking certainty through an illusion rather than reality. This process is enhanced when reality becomes particularly uncomfortable. Children frequently prefer such illusions, creating imaginary worlds and friends when the real world becomes too uncomfortable. But identity is not reality. It is a safe place, quote unquote, where one can hide from reality. Adults who adopt their stories, loose recollections of past events conflated with various facts and fictions, as their identities, find their ability to deal objectively with reality diminished. When my brain reverts to identity as the primary truth, I reflexively seek external inputs that reinforce the illusion. Again, my confirmation bias dominates. Plato's allegory of the cave, 380 BC, addresses how the illusion of identity can dominate our perceptions to the point where experience becomes little more than watching shadows on the wall. He contrasts the flat, colorless illusion in the cave of our identity with the rich, multidimensional world of instantaneous experience, of vast horizons. But the cave of identity has no horizon. It is home to stories born of fear and regret, with the constant repetition, cognitive reinforcement, become familiar and therefore perversely comforting. Beyond the cave are the unfamiliar and vast horizons of possibility, unique for each of us. But they are only accessible if we free ourselves from the chains of identity holding us prisoner.